My mom told me flights to Hawaii for your sister's wedding are $1,200. If you can't afford it, just stay home. She said it like it was nothing, like I was just an afterthought. I laughed softly, pretending it didn't hurt, but then my phone buzzed. 4 business class tickets had been charged to my card. My father, Robert, my mother, Carolyn, my sister, Kelsey, and her fiancé, Derek. My name wasn't there. In that moment, staring at the screen, I understood. I wasn't invited as family. I was expected to pay for them to celebrate without me. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I dropped my bag just inside the door and leaned against it, too tired to even turn on the light. My scrubs still smelled like disinfectant and sweat. My shoes felt like bricks on my feet, and my hands shook as I fumbled for a glass of water. It was nearly midnight in Seattle, the kind of quiet where the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator and your own pulse in your ears. I had just finished a 12-hour shift, my 3rd in a row, and all I wanted was a shower and maybe 10 minutes of silence before collapsing into bed. That's when my phone lit up and started buzzing. I almost let it ring, but then I saw the name, Mom. I slid my finger across the screen, pressed it to my ear, and immediately heard her voice echo through speakerphone. The flights to Hawaii for Kelsey's wedding are $1,200 each. If you don't have it, then just stay home. Her tone was casual, almost sweet, but it carried that hard edge she always used when she meant it wasn't really a choice. She didn't ask if I wanted to come. She didn't ask if I could afford it. It was an announcement like the weather, as though the decision had already been made without me. I froze in the middle of my kitchen, still holding the glass of water. My throat tightened, but I forced a little laugh out. Okay, Mom. I understand. She didn't even bother to say goodbye. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the dark screen. My own voice echoed back in my head. Understand? That word tasted bitter. Inside I was screaming. Another reminder that I was an outsider in my own family. My sister, Kelsey, the bride, of course, had everything arranged. Dad would play the proud father of the bride, Mom would glow as mother of the bride, and Derek, well, Derek would stand there pretending to be successful. And me, I was just the nurse who was expected to pick up the check when something went wrong. I sank into the chair by the small kitchen table, rubbing my temples, telling myself to just breathe. That's when my phone chimed again. A new alert from my credit card app. At first I thought it was the usual monthly payment reminder, but when I opened it, my heart stopped. Charge pending 4 business class tickets. Seattle to Honolulu. I scrolled down my eyes, racing over the names Robert Morgan, Carolyn Morgan, Kelsey Morgan, Derek Parker. My name was nowhere. For a full minute, I sat frozen, staring at the screen. My fingers went cold and my chest tightened so hard it felt like someone had strapped a weight across me. They hadn't even asked. They hadn't even told me. They had simply assumed I would pay. My pulse hammered in my ears. I imagined them at that very moment already planning the champagne toast on the plane, the Lees waiting for them at the resort, the pictures they'd post with captions about family togetherness. And me, I wasn't even given a seat in coach, let alone business class. I felt my teeth clench, jaw aching. Not this time. My thumb moved before my mind could second guess. Dispute transaction. Dispute all. Confirm. Then I tapped again and locked the account completely. The app confirmed with a cold little check mark. Transactions blocked. Card locked. My hand was trembling when I set the phone down, but a wave of something hot and sharp surged through me. Anger, yes, but also relief. Like I had finally slammed a door that should have been shut years ago. I sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the silence of my apartment, the faint city sounds drifting up from the street below. I looked at my shoes by the door. Old gray sneakers with the soles worn thin from years of double shifts. They were scuffed, bent out of shape, but they were mine. Paid for with my own work, my own hours. The thought hit me sudden and cruel. My own family had just placed me outside my sister's wedding. Not because I didn't want to be there, not because I didn't love her, but because to them, my worth was measured in dollars and how much of the bill I could cover. The clock ticked past midnight. My head ached from fatigue, but sleep was impossible. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, letting the truth sink in like ice water. I wasn't invited to celebrate my sister's wedding. I was expected to fund it. And now I wasn't playing along. I was 22 the first time it happened. Kelsey had called me in a panic a week before her engagement party. She said she'd found the perfect dress, something timeless, classy, just right for the photos. The only problem was she'd maxed out her own credit card. She asked if she could borrow mine. Just this once, she promised. I remember standing in my tiny studio apartment holding my phone between my shoulder and ear, while folding my scrubs from another double shift. I told her I didn't have much room, but she laughed it off. "Come on, Abs, you work in healthcare. You've got a steady job. I'll pay you back by the end of the month." The charge was $700. I told myself it wasn't that big a deal, that it was family, that I'd see the money soon. I never did. Months turned into years, and she never even mentioned it again. It was like that dress had been bought out of thin air, erased from memory, except every month I still carried the interest that started with that swipe. 2 years later, Dad came to me with a different request. It was 2018, and I had just moved into a slightly bigger apartment closer to the hospital. He showed up one evening with paperwork in his hand. "We're remodeling the kitchen," he said, pushing the forms across my kitchen table. "It'll raise the resale value, and one day this house will be yours." I remember staring at the dotted line, the space for my signature as co-signer. "Dad, I don't know if I can." He cut me off with that look, the one that always meant, "Don't argue. It's not even for us. It's for you down the line. You'll inherit." "This is smart." I signed, telling myself again that this was family, that it was temporary. But months later, I learned the money had been diverted, used to bail out Derek after his second failed business venture. The kitchen looked the same, but my credit report didn't. Then came 2020. Derek borrowed my car while his was in the shop. He swore it was just for a week. I got the call at 2 a.m. "Hey, there's been a little fender bender," he said casually, like he was telling me he'd forgotten to grab milk. The fender bender left my bumper crumpled and my insurance premiums doubled. When I asked if he was going to help with the deductible, he shrugged and said, "That's what insurance is for, right?" Each incident stacked on top of the last like bricks pressing down on my chest. And every time I told myself the same thing: family is family. I have a steady paycheck. I can handle it. I swallowed the bitterness, stuffed it down, kept moving. But the resentment built like water behind a dam, quiet but relentless. Then winter of 2021 arrived, one of the worst flu seasons I'd ever worked through. I picked up extra shifts covering for coworkers who were sick themselves. I barely slept, living on vending machine coffee and adrenaline. My body finally gave out. Fever hit me hard one night, leaving me shivering on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, lungs aching with every breath. In my haze, I called Mom. My voice cracked when she answered. "Mom, I feel awful. Could you maybe bring me some soup?" I remember the pause on the other end, then her voice calm and almost cheerful. "Oh, sweetheart, I promised Kelsey I'd watch the kids while she gets her hair done. You understand, don't you?" I stared at the phone in my hand, my body shaking with fever, and for a second I thought I hadn't heard her right. "I'm running 102, I whispered, but she was already talking over me, saying she had to go. I hung up and let the phone slip to the carpet. I curled deeper under the blanket, listening to my own ragged breathing, my head pounding. The loneliness was sharper than the fever. In that moment, I realized what I had been avoiding all along. I wasn't a priority. Not to her, not to Dad, not to Kelsey. I was a convenience, a resource, a wallet they could open whenever they pleased. I told myself family would be there when it really mattered. But lying there alone in that dark apartment, sweating through my sheets while my mother watched Kelsey's kids so she could sit in a salon chair, I finally understood the truth. I had never been first in their eyes. I had never even been second. I was a means to an end, nothing more. The vibration on my nightstand rattled the glass of water I'd left there. At first, I tried to ignore it, pulling the blanket tighter around me, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. I fumbled for my phone, eyes still blurry from sleep, and saw Kelsey's name flashing across the screen. Dozens of texts stacked one after another. $1,200. Why isn't it paid? We're stuck at the check-in counter. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, I almost felt guilty, almost like the old me who would rush to fix whatever problem they had created. But then I remembered Mom's voice from the night before. If you don't have it, stay home. I typed back slowly, deliberately. What are you talking about? I'm staying home. Just like Mom said. I hit send and set the phone back on the nightstand. I thought that would be the end of it, but not 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was a voicemail. I let it go, but curiosity got the better of me. I played it back. Kelsey's voice shrieked through the speaker, high-pitched and raw with anger. You're ruining my wedding, Abby. Everyone's watching, and we're standing here like idiots because of you. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her words echoed in the quiet of my apartment. My hand trembled, but instead of tears, something strange washed over me. Calm. A kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling, apologizing, patching holes in their perfect little picture. I stared at the phone, then pressed the side button until the screen went black. I held it in my hand for a long moment, the silence almost deafening after her screaming. Then I stood up, walked over to my desk, and flipped open my laptop. Oregon. I typed the word into the search bar. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first, but then I found it a cabin rental on the coast, 2 hours from Portland, right on the water. The pictures showed weathered wood, a small porch with a rocking chair and windows looking out over gray-blue waves. The price was modest, nothing close to $1,200. And best of all, it was mine. I clicked reserve, entered my own card number, and hit confirm. The confirmation page glowed on my screen. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had chosen something for myself. Not because I was guilted into it, not because someone else demanded it, just because I wanted it. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet and set it on the bed. The zipper squealed as I dragged it open. I folded jeans, t-shirts, and my thickest sweater, sliding them neatly inside. From the bathroom cabinet, I grabbed my toothbrush and my prescription bottle, turning it over in my hand. I hesitated, then tucked it into the side pocket. As I packed, I thought about what Kelsey had said in that voicemail. You're ruining my wedding. I laughed under my breath. No, I wasn't ruining anything. I was simply refusing to pay for a show I was never invited to be part of. I zipped the suitcase shut and set it by the door. My apartment was still quiet, the early morning light seeping pale and soft through the blinds. For once, that silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like space I could breathe in. I looked down at the little bottle of pills peeking out of the side pocket and whispered to myself, this time, no one decides for me. This time it's just me. The words didn't feel defiant. They felt like a promise. A promise that the weekend ahead wouldn't carry the weight of anyone else's expectations, only my own. The pounding rattled the doorframe so hard I thought it might splinter. I froze mid-step, a shirt half folded in my hands, the suitcase gaping open on the bed behind me. Abigail! My father's voice boomed through the wood, sharp, furious. You're making this family a laughingstock. Do you understand that everyone is already talking? This is your sister's wedding, not some kind of joke. I stood still, my pulse hammering in my ears. I could see his shadow moving under the crack at the bottom of the door, the Hawaiian print shirt he'd probably thrown on in the airport, still clinging to his shoulders. His fist struck the door again, each bang like a jolt through my chest. Open this door right now. Don't you get it? The whole family is laughing at us. At me. At your mother. You're humiliating us in front of everyone. I pressed my palm flat against the door but didn't turn the lock. My breath came in shallow bursts. Part of me wanted to scream back, to fling the door wide open and show him exactly how humiliated I felt after years of being treated like a bank account. But the stronger part of me stayed silent. Abigail, answer me. His voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with rage. You can't just hide in there while your sister stands at the altar without you. You owe her this." I swallowed hard, my hand curling into a fist against the wood. I owed her. How many years of bills, loans, favors had I quietly paid while they looked the other way? The silence between his shouts was deafening, but I clung to it. Minutes dragged his pounding, growing weaker, then stopping altogether. The hallway fell quiet except for his angry breathing. Then footsteps retreating. I sank into the chair by the window, my phone clenched so tight it left an imprint in my palm. A new voicemail buzzed almost immediately. I let it play through the speaker. It was my mother's voice, cool and heavy with disappointment. "Abby, how could you do this? Your father flew back early just to talk to you. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You're being selfish and you're tearing this family apart." I hit save then. Sat there in the dim afternoon light staring at the phone. My voice came out in a whisper. Steady for once. Not for me. From me. Always from me. The apartment felt different after that, quieter but lighter too. I stood and pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the late sun and the view of the parking lot below. For the first time in my life I realized I'd said no. Not with words, but with silence, with a door that stayed locked. And in that small act, something inside me finally unclenched. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen, the only light in the room. My suitcase was still half packed by the door, but I couldn't think about Oregon, not yet. My mind was circling numbers debts and the countless times I had told myself it was fine. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed the first line, Kelsey's engagement dress. $700. My fingers hovered before hitting enter, the memory of that phone call flashing back. Her laughter when she promised she'd pay me back. She never did. The next row, loan for Derek's failed business, $2,500. I remembered Dad's face when he pushed the papers toward me, saying it was for the good of the family, saying it was an investment. The business had folded within months. The cursor blinked on the third line. Dad's MRI deductible, $900. I typed the number and thought about the night I rushed him to urgent care, the way he argued with the receptionist about costs until I handed over my card. He never brought it up again. Groceries for Mom, $550. I remembered the text. "Can you just grab them this week? I'll Venmo you right back." But she never did. Finally, the last line. Flights to Hawaii, $4,800. I stared at the number bile rising in my throat. They hadn't even asked. They had simply assumed. I added the column. Watched the total appear at the bottom, 8,450. The number glowed on the screen, stark and undeniable. I leaned back, running both hands through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the proof, the paper trail of 10 years of being drained piece by piece until I didn't even realize how much had been taken. I opened my email. My hands trembled as I typed. To family group chat. I let the cursor blink for a moment, then began. According to the belief that families support each other, here is a breakdown of the support I have extended over the last 24 months. The total is $8,450. I expect repayment within 30 days. I read the words 3 times, my stomach tightening with every pass. My head screamed at me to delete it, to back down, to avoid the storm that would follow. I could already hear Mom calling me ungrateful dad, accusing me of betrayal, Kelsey shrieking about how I was ruining her big day. But another voice, quieter but steadier, rose inside me. They'll say you're ungrateful. They'll say you're cruel. But you're not. You're asking for fairness. I rested my finger over the trackpad, the send button glowing red. My chest ached, my hand shook, but I pressed down anyway. The little notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Message sent. The room suddenly felt heavier, then lighter, like the air had shifted. I exhaled, long and shaky, as if I'd been holding my breath for years. My back pressed against the chair, my eyes closed, sweat gathering at my temples. For a long while I just sat there listening to the silence. My phone lay face down on the table, sure to light up any second with their replies, but I didn't touch it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to fix, to pay to cover. For the first time, I had put it all down in writing and I wasn't taking it back. I stared at the number one more time on the screen, $450, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not just anger, not just fear, control. And it felt like the beginning of something I should have done a long time ago. The next morning, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Numbers I didn't recognize filled the screen, each call rolling into the next. I let them go to voicemail, my stomach tightening with every buzz. When I finally looked, there were a dozen missed calls and 3 new voicemails. I didn't press play. I already knew the tone I'd hear. Outrage, guilt, the kind of disappointment that pretended to be love. Then a text popped up from Aunt Linda. "Everyone's talking. They say you're selfish, that you've ruined your sister's wedding." My chest burned as I read it. Even the relatives who barely remembered my birthday suddenly had opinions. I scrolled down one message after another, each one. Some variation of the same chorus. Abby's cold. Abby's ungrateful. Abby doesn't know what family means. I set the phone down. My fingers trembling, my throat thick. The shame was sharp, slicing deeper because it came wrapped in family names, people who were supposed to know me. For a moment, I almost wanted to call back to explain, to defend myself. But then another message arrived, and this one was different. It was from Olivia, my cousin, the one studying law in Portland. "Do you realize what they did qualifies as credit card fraud, using your card without consent? Demand. You could file a police report if you wanted. You're not powerless in this, Abby." I read it twice, my pulse quickening. Fraud. It was the first time someone put a real word, a legal word, to what had been happening for years. Not just borrowing, not just family favors. Fraud. I typed back, my hands shaking. "You really think so? Even though it's family." Her reply came instantly. "Family or not, the law doesn't care. It's theft. And they know it. That's why they're panicking." A strange heat spread through me. It wasn't anger this time. It was relief, almost gratitude. Someone finally wasn't telling me to forgive, to swallow it, to keep the peace. Someone was giving me permission to see it for what it was. I opened the group chat again. Message after message from Mom, Dad, Kelsey. Words dripping with accusation. "How could you embarrass us like this? You owe us better. We're family." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my photo gallery, took a screenshot of the disputed flight charges, then one of the email with my invoice. Then I scrolled back further. Old transfers, Venmo receipts, every little favor that had quietly drained me. Click. Save me. Click. Save. My phone filled with proof pixel by pixel until it felt heavier in my hand. Evidence. Not excuses. Not apologies. Evidence. Another text from Olivia buzzed through. "If you want, I can connect you with someone who handles these cases. Just think about it. Don't let them tell you this is normal." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. The noise from my relatives, the shaming, the whispers about how I was ruining everything. It all pressed in around me. But under it now was something solid. A lifeline. I whispered to myself, tasting the words. "If blood won't protect me, the law will." I opened my notes app and started a new folder, titling it Evidence. Screenshot after screenshot slid inside. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about drawing a line, one they couldn't move this time. The calls kept coming. The messages kept piling up, but for the first time I didn't feel cornered. I felt prepared. The hallway lights flickered overhead as I pushed the med cart past the nurse's station, my feet dragging like they were made of lead. Every step felt heavier than the last. My eyes burned, my vision swimming a little, but I kept moving because that's what I always did. Keep moving. A frail hand reached out from one of the rooms as I passed. I stopped, turned, and saw Mr. Harris, the older patient with congestive heart failure, looking up at me. His skin was pale, his eyes tired, but when he took my hand, his grip was surprisingly firm. "You're an angel," he whispered, his voice hoarse but certain. "Don't think we don't see how hard you work." I forced a smile, blinking against the sting of tears. "Get some rest, Mr. Harris? I'll check on you in a bit." I barely made it 2 doors down before the hallway tilted beneath me. My knees buckled and suddenly a strong arm caught me under the shoulder. "Abby, whoa, doctor," Patel said, steadying me. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly, my cheeks burning. "Yeah, just skipped lunch." He frowned, unconvinced, but guided me to the empty chair at the nurse's station anyway. I sat pressing a hand to my forehead, trying to slow my breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. Before I could gather myself, I heard my name again. Abby, my office. Now, it was Supervisor Miller standing at the end of the hall with that look she always wore when she'd seen too much. I stood, legs shaky, and followed her. Inside, she shut the door and leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You're good, Abby. One of the best we've got. But this working double's skipping meals, nearly collapsing in front of a patient. That's not sustainable." I opened my mouth, but she raised a hand. "Don't. I know what you're going to say. Bills, loans, family." Her eyes softened just a little. "But you can't carry all of it forever. You can't save everyone if you're destroying yourself." I looked down at my hands in my lap, the skin dry and cracked from sanitizer, the nails bitten to the quick. I didn't argue. There was nothing to say. She was right. Her voice gentled. "Boundaries aren't selfish, Abby. They're necessary. Learn them before this job or your family swallows you whole." I swallowed hard, my throat thick, and nodded. She let me go without another word. Out in the hallway, I pulled my phone from my pocket, intending to shove it into my bag and forget it for the rest of the shift. But the screen lit up before I could. A new message. Kelsey. I opened it and the words cut sharp. "You'll regret this. The wedding isn't complete without you. You're ruining everything." I stared at the message for a long moment, the edges of my vision blurring with exhaustion. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to defend myself, to fire back. Instead, I held down the screen until the message disappeared. Delete. My voice slipped out under my breath, low but steady. "It can be complete without me." The words felt foreign but powerful. I shoved the phone deep into my pocket and walked toward the break room, each step steadier than the last. Outside, dawn was breaking, the first sliver of light spreading pale and pink across the city skyline. When I stepped out of the hospital doors at the end of my shift, the cool morning air hit my face, and for the first time in days, I inhaled deeply. My body ached. My mind was wrung out. But under it all, a new resolve had taken root. I wasn't going to let them keep taking pieces of me, not here, not at work, not at home. The sun rose higher, washing the streets in gold, and I kept walking, tired but unshaken. The ocean glittered under the Honolulu sun waves, rolling steady against the shore. But inside the resort ballroom, chaos spilled into every corner. Guests in silk dresses and pressed tuxedos fanned themselves, whispering behind manicured hands, as Derek's voice rose above the string quartet warming up in the corner. "I already wired the deposit," he shouted at the resort manager. His face red, his tie pulled loose. "You people are incompetent." The manager, calm but firm, held up the clipboard. "Sir, the balance was never cleared. We cannot release the ballroom or catering without full payment." I imagined my mother stepping in, her voice dripping with charm that couldn't quite mask desperation. "There must be some mistake. We have guests waiting. My daughter is getting married today." Dad stood stiff beside her, his jaw clenched, his face turning redder with each passing second. He tugged at his collar like the air had thickened around him. And Kelsey, my perfect sister, the bride, stood just off to the side, mascara already streaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "You promised this wouldn't happen," she hissed at Derek, her bouquet trembling in her grip. The whispers grew louder, snide comments slipping through the hum of the crowd. Weren't they bragging about business class tickets? I thought the Morgans were doing well. Guess not. Every pair of eyes in the room darted toward my parents, toward Derek, toward Kelsey. The music faltered, then stopped completely. And there, sitting near the aisle, Pastor John folded his hands, shaking his head slowly. Later, I would hear from Aunt Linda that he'd muttered under his breath, "This is pride meeting its own downfall." Somehow the ceremony limped forward. The vows were rushed, the flowers wilted in the heat, and the joy that should have filled the air was drowned out by tension. Guests sipped champagne without toasting, glancing at one another with thin smiles. Afterward, as the reception staggered into motion, Pastor John excused himself and slipped outside. He pulled out his phone, dialing my number. I didn't answer right away. I was sitting on the porch of a small, weathered cabin in Oregon, staring at the sea. The phone buzzed again, and I picked up. His voice was gentle but heavy with meaning. "Abigail, I saw it all. You need to know. You have every right to protect yourself. No one has the authority to turn you into a victim for the sake of appearances, not even family." For a moment I couldn't speak, the lump in my throat too thick. I closed my eyes, listening to the gulls crying outside my cabin, the waves steady against the shore. When we hung up, I stayed there in silence, phone resting in my lap. Aunt Linda's texts started pouring in not long after describing how guests had left early, how the resort demanded immediate payment, how Kelsey wept through half her reception while Derek disappeared to make frantic calls. I leaned back in the rocking chair, the salty breeze brushing against my face. I could almost picture the scene. The dream wedding crumbling into whispers, resentment, and humiliation. And yet I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I looked out across the endless stretch of ocean, the horizon glowing orange with the setting sun, and exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "I don't have to stand in the middle of it to see the truth," I whispered to myself. The tide pulled back, rolled in again, steady and relentless like freedom itself. 3 days after the wedding fiasco, I was sitting on the porch of the cabin watching the Oregon surf crash against the rocks when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. I almost ignored it. I'd muted most of my family by then. But the name on the screen made me sit up straighter. Marissa Lee, Derek's ex-wife. I hadn't spoken to her in years. The last I heard, she'd moved across the country, started over after their messy divorce. I opened the message with caution. "Hi, Abby," it read. "Sorry to reach out like this, but I think you need to see something. Check your email." My pulse spiked. I logged into my inbox and found her message waiting with a PDF attachment. I clicked it open. Page after page of bank statements filled the screen. Transfers from joint family accounts, transactions labeled Coinbase, Binance, crypto buy-in, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned off in chunks, all tied to Derek's name. At the end of the file, screenshots of emails. One from my mother, Carolyn, written in her neat, overly formal tone. "Marissa, please don't bring this up right now. It would devastate Kelsey before the wedding. We'll handle it." Another from my father, Robert. "We'll fix this. Abigail doesn't need to know. Keep quiet until after the ceremony." The room seemed to tilt around me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. They knew. They all knew Derek was draining accounts gambling with crypto, and they hid it. They hid it from me while they used my card for flights. Anger flared so hot it made me dizzy, but beneath it was something else. Relief. For once, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the lies, the manipulations. Here it was in black and white. I hit call before I could second guess. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Abby Marissa's voice was tentative but steady. "Why are you sending me this?" My voice shook, not from fear but from the force of holding everything in. She sighed. "Because I've been where you are. I know what it's like to be drained, lied to, made to feel like you owe them everything. Derek did it to me and your parents covered for him then too. I couldn't stand by and watch them bleed you dry. I swallowed hard, gripping the phone. So you've known all this time? Yes, she admitted softly. But you're finally standing up to them. And you deserve to know the truth. For a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes stung, vision blurring as tears welled. No one in my family had ever stood beside me. Not really. And here was the one person who didn't owe me a thing telling me she refused to stay silent. You don't know what this means, I whispered, my voice breaking. I think I do, she said. Use it. Protect yourself. Don't let them twist this back on you. When the call ended, I sat there, phone pressed to my chest, the weight of it sinking in. For the first time, someone had given me more than guilt or excuses. They'd given me evidence. I went inside, printed every page, each sheet spitting from the printer with a mechanical whir. When it was done, I stacked them neatly, stapled them into a packet, and slid the papers into a folder. The cover felt heavy in my hands, heavier than anything I'd carried for them before. This wasn't just my anger anymore. This was proof. Proof that the truth had always been there, buried under their lies. I placed the folder on my desk, smoothed the cover flat with my palm, and let out a breath that trembled as it left me. For the first time in years, I wasn't empty-handed. I had the truth, and it was mine to use. The glow of my laptop lit up the small living room, the only sound, the low hum of the heating unit against the January chill outside. I opened the folder Marissa had sent, dragging each screenshot, each bank transfer, each email into the spreadsheet I had started weeks earlier. Row after row of evidence, not just numbers but stories. My sister's dress, my father's deductible, Derek's gambling habit dressed up as investment. At the bottom of the invoice, I added a note. From this point forward, any unauthorized charges will be reported to law enforcement. This is my final request. My hands trembled on the keys, but my mind was sharp clear. I attached the file to a new message addressed to the Morgan family group chat. I read it one last time, then hit send. The little whoosh sound echoed in the room, final and irrevocable. But I wasn't finished. I opened a second email window, addressed it to HR Director Collins at Cascade Builders, the construction firm where my father had worked for nearly 20 years. I hesitated only a moment before dragging in the packet of Marissa's documents, pairing them with my invoice. I typed, "For your awareness. Relevant to employee Robert Morgan." When I pressed send this time, my heart pounded, but my breathing stayed steady. The old me would have been shaking, frantic, waiting for the fallout. But now I just sat back, folded my arms across my chest, and let the silence stretch. The first responses came within minutes. Mom, this is cruel. How could you do this to us, to your sister Kelsey? You've lost it, Abby. You're jealous, that's what this is. Derek didn't reply at all, which told me enough. Dad's message came hours later, short and furious. We'll deal with this as a family, not through threats. Take it back. I didn't answer. Days passed. My phone buzzed constantly, the family chat filling with demands, denials, excuses. I ignored them all. I went to work, I slept. I ate, I let the weight of it slide off my back like rain. For once, it wasn't my burden. A week later, the email I had been waiting for appeared in my inbox. Dear Ms. Morgan, it began. This is to confirm that effective immediately, Robert Morgan is no longer employed with Cascade Builders, following an internal review. I read it 3 times, my pulse steady, my lips pressed together in something that wasn't quite a smile. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vengeance. It was simply truth catching up. By the next morning, Aunt Linda was calling, her voice hushed and urgent. Words out, Abby. Everyone knows. Your dad's been let go. They're saying it's about money, about Derek. People are whispering at church. Your mom looks like a ghost. I thanked her and hung up my chest hollow. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but release, like the final cord tying me to their mess had finally snapped. That night, another text came from Dad. Just one line. You've ruined everything. But remember, family is not a transaction. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, then slowly pressed delete. My thoughts came unbidden, quiet but fierce. Family only becomes a transaction when one side is always the one paying. I shut the phone off, set it face down on the table, and leaned back into the couch. For the first time in years, the room felt like mine. The office was warm, the soft hum of a white noise machine filling the quiet between words. I sat across from Dr. Heller, twisting a tissue in my lap until it shredded into thin strips. My throat felt raw from speaking, but I didn't stop. I told her about the dress, the loan, the car accident, the flights to Hawaii. 10 years of stories that all ended the same way, with me footing the bill, with me standing outside looking in. When I finally stopped, Dr. Heller leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but unflinching. Abby, you've been the wallet of your family for a decade. That role was forced on you, but you're not required to keep playing it. You can stop. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. I blinked hard, my vision blurring. I had known it somewhere deep inside, but hearing it said out loud by someone who didn't benefit from my exhaustion, it was different. In the weeks after that session, I started letting myself breathe again. David Chen, the quiet software engineer I'd met in the hospital cafeteria, asked if I wanted to grab lunch one afternoon. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became cooking together in my kitchen, laughing as we burned garlic bread, washing dishes side by side. On weekends, we walked around Green Lake, the water rippling in the Seattle breeze, talking about everything from favorite childhood books to where we saw ourselves in 10 years. For the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a future that wasn't built on sacrifice. Then one afternoon, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. My name written in my mother's careful, looping handwriting. My hands shook as I carried it inside, sat down at the table, and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, a check made out to me. $8,450, the exact amount of my invoice. No note, no apology, just silence printed in blue ink and signed in my mother's name. I stared at it for a long time, my stomach twisting. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't remorse. It was a transaction, one final attempt to tidy up the mess without ever admitting it happened. I walked into my bedroom, pulled a thumbtack from the drawer, and pinned the check to the wall above my desk. Right beneath the quote I'd scribbled months earlier on a yellow sticky note, "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." The two pieces of paper hung together, a reminder and a reckoning. That night over dinner with David, I told him about it. He listened quietly, nodding, not interrupting. When I was done, he reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "So, what are you going to do with it?" I thought about it for days. I could pay off part of my student loans, fix my car, take a real vacation for once in my life. But none of it felt right. One morning, I walked into the administrative office at the University of Washington's nursing school. I met with a coordinator and handed her the check. "I want this to start a small scholarship," I said, "for students working their way through school while supporting their families." She looked at me with surprise, then nodded, accepting it. When I walked back out into the gray Seattle drizzle, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't just about money. It was about giving that burden back, setting it down, and walking away. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the window open to the cool air, listening to the faint hum of the city. David chopped vegetables while I poured us each a glass of wine. I leaned back, watching him, and a smile crept across my face. Small, then wider, until it filled me. For the first time in more than a decade, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. The next guilt trip, the next bill slipped under my door. I wasn't calculating how to stretch myself thinner to make room for everyone else. I was free. The little bell above the cafe door jingled as I stepped inside, brushing the drizzle from my jacket. The place smelled of espresso and fresh pastries, the kind of comfort I had started to let myself enjoy on quiet Saturday mornings. I stood in line, scrolling absently through my phone when I heard a voice I knew too well. Abby. I turned, and there she was. My mother. Carolyn stood near the back corner table, smaller than I remembered her posture, just a little hunched. Her eyes searching mine with something I couldn't quite read. For a moment, the noise of the cafe seemed to drop away. I walked over, my body tense but my face calm. She gestured to the chair across from her. Can we sit for a minute? I pulled out the chair, the scrape loud against the tile, and lowered myself into it. She spoke first, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. No matter what's happened, we're still family. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. I held her gaze steady and unblinking. That's not a reason for me to be used anymore. The words hung heavy between us. She flinched just slightly, like the truth had finally landed. She reached into her purse, pulled out a plain envelope, and slid it across the table. I just wanted to give you this. I didn't touch it. I just stared at her hand resting on the envelope, then back up at her face. For once, I felt nothing sharp, no sting of betrayal, no desperate need for her approval. Only distance, clear and defined. After a long silence, she stood. I hope someday you'll come back. I said nothing. She turned and left, her footsteps fading into the hum of the cafe. The envelope sat in front of me unopened. I slipped it into my bag without looking at it because whatever was inside didn't matter anymore. Later that week, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment. The walls were bare boxes stacked neatly against one side, sunlight pouring through wide windows onto hardwood floors. David carried in the last box, setting it down with a grin. That's the last of it. I looked around, breathing in the space, the light, the quiet that wasn't empty, but full of possibility. For the first time, this was a home I had chosen, not one I had been pushed into or guilted into keeping. As I set the final box on the counter, I thought back to every slammed door, every unpaid debt, every voicemail heavy with manipulation. All of it had led here to this moment. My voice rose steady in my own mind, clear and certain. If you've ever been treated like your only worth was what you could give, know this. You have the right to close that door and keep the key for yourself. I stepped to the window, the city stretching out before me, bathed in afternoon light. I smiled, letting the warmth wash over me, and finally I let the past stay behind the door I had shut for good. This was my life now, and I was keeping it. If you've ever had to fight to draw those boundaries, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone. Share your thoughts. Share your stories, because the more we speak them out loud, the more we remind each other we don't have to burn ourselves down to keep others warm. The camera in my mind's eye pulled back the frame wide, the light spilling across the floor as I closed the door behind me. And this time, I held the key.